My best friend stole my wealthy doctor fiance and flaunted their perfect marriage for years. 10 years later, at a charity gala, she smirked and said, "Still single, I see." I smiled and replied, "Actually, meet my husband." The moment she saw Theo's face, she went completely pale, because he owned the law firm investigating her husband's medical malpractice case. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The annual Wellington Medical Foundation Charity Gala was in full swing at the Grand Bellevue Hotel, the kind of event where Manhattan's elite gathered to write checks and be seen. Crystal chandeliers cast a golden glow over the ballroom filled with the city's most influential doctors, lawyers, and philanthropists in their designer evening wear. The air hummed with classical music from the string quartet and the constant murmur of networking conversations. I smoothed the fabric of my emerald silk gown, a custom piece that had cost more than my first car, and took a deep breath. I had earned my place here. My interior design firm had recently completed the renovation of the pediatric wing at Wellington Memorial, a project that had garnered attention from the city's most exclusive clients. Tonight wasn't just about charity, it was my formal introduction to this circle as a peer rather than an outsider. The invitation had arrived embossed on heavy cream cardstock, and I had nearly declined when I saw the list of board members. Dr. Philip Montgomery's name was there, of course, my ex-fiancé, whose betrayal had once shattered my world, but Theo had convinced me otherwise, his blue eyes serious as he'd taken my hands in his. "Emily, you've worked too hard to let the past keep you from celebrating this achievement," he'd said. "Besides, I'll be right there with you." But Theo was running late. An emergency at his firm had detained him, leaving me to make my entrance alone. I had texted him twice already, trying to keep the anxiety from my messages. I accepted a glass of champagne from a passing server and moved through. The crowd with practiced ease, exchanging pleasantries with clients and donors I recognized. The confidence I projected was real now, not the facade I would have needed to maintain a decade ago. Back then, I had been defining myself by who loved me rather than who I was. As I paused near an ice sculpture of the foundation's logo, I felt it, that distinct prickle at the back of my neck that told me I was being watched. I turned slowly, my heartbeat quickening as I scanned the crowd. And then I saw her, Fiona Harrison, née Wilson, my former best friend since college, was standing across the room, her trademark red hair styled in an elegant updo. She was draped in a designer gown that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. The diamond necklace at her throat caught the light as she laughed at something someone had said. She hadn't noticed me yet. For a moment, I was transported back in time, to our shared apartment with its mismatched furniture, to late nights studying together, to the countless secrets we'd shared. To the day I'd introduced her to Philip, my brilliant doctor boyfriend, never suspecting she would betray me in the worst possible way. I considered retreating to the restroom to compose myself, to wait for Theo's arrival before inevitably facing her. But something kept me rooted to the spot. I was no longer the devastated 26-year-old whose fiancé and best friend had betrayed her. I was Emily Lancaster, founder of Lancaster Interiors, with a portfolio of high-profile projects and a life rebuilt from the ground up. The moment stretched between us like a thread pulled taut, waiting to snap. And then it did. Her eyes met mine across the crowded room. There was a flash of recognition, followed by something I couldn't quite read. Surprise? Discomfort? It was quickly masked by a practiced smile as she whispered something to her companion, and began making her way toward me. Each click of her heels against the marble floor was like a countdown. I took another sip of champagne, feeling the cool liquid contrast with the warmth spreading through my chest. 10 years of distance, of healing, of building a new life, and yet her approach still triggered an instinctive fight-or-flight response. Emily? Emily Lancaster? Her voice was exactly as I remembered it, melodic and confident with that undertone of charm that had once made everyone, including me, trust her implicitly. Fiona. I kept my tone neutral, neither warm nor cold. It's been a long time. She air-kissed both my cheeks, a gesture so falsely intimate it made my skin crawl. The scent of her expensive perfume, something exclusive and French, enveloped me momentarily. God, it must be what, 10 years? She stepped back, her eyes traveling over me in a swift assessment. I recognized that look. She was mentally calculating the worth of my outfit, my jewelry, my overall presentation. Once, that appraisal would have made me shrink. Now, I stood taller. Something like that, I replied, taking another sip of champagne. How have you been? Oh, you know, busy. She laughed lightly. Philip's just been made head of cardiology at Wellington. We've been renovating our place in the Hamptons, and I'm chairing 3 charity boards this year. She flashed her left hand, where a massive diamond caught the light. 10 years married in August. Each achievement was delivered like a dart, meant to pierce. I could see it in her eyes. She was waiting for me to flinch, to show some sign that her perfect life with my ex-fiancé still had the power to wound me. And you? She continued, her gaze dropping conspicuously to my left hand. Still single, I see. The old Emily might have mumbled something self-deprecating, might have felt diminished by the comparison. But I wasn't that woman anymore. I smiled, feeling a strange sense of calm wash over me as I heard familiar footsteps approaching from behind. Actually, I said, turning slightly as a warm hand came to rest on the small of my back. Meet my husband. The moment Fiona's eyes shifted from me to the man beside me, I saw it. The flash of recognition, followed by the blood draining from her face. Her carefully composed expression crumbled as she took in the sight of Theo Monroe, founding partner of Monroe and Ashford, the law firm handling the class action lawsuit against Wellington Memorial, and specifically against Dr. Philip Montgomery, for falsifying patient data in his groundbreaking cardiac treatment study. Her champagne glass trembled slightly in her hand. Theo. Monroe? Hello, Fiona, Theo said pleasantly, extending his hand. I believe we've spoken on the phone. My office has been trying to schedule a deposition with your husband for weeks now. And in that moment, as I watched her perfect facade crack, I realized that sometimes justice arrives in ways you never anticipated. Fiona's perfect composure, something she had always prided herself on, was visibly shaken. Her eyes darted between Theo and me, trying to process this unexpected connection. I didn't realize you two knew each other, she managed, her voice slightly higher than normal. We've been married for 3 years now, I said, leaning slightly into Theo's side. His arm tightened protectively around my waist. Emily designed my firm's offices, Theo added, looking at me with genuine warmth. I fell in love with her vision before I even met her. The irony wasn't lost on me, while Philip had been impressed. By my social connections and family background, Theo had first valued my work, my talent. He'd seen me as a professional before seeing me as a romantic prospect, something Philip never truly had. Fiona's smile returned, but it was strained at the edges. What a small world, she said, her voice hollow. And quite the coincidence. Not really a coincidence, Theo replied pleasantly. We move in similar professional circles now. The emphasis on now hung in the air between us. Fiona understood the implication. I was no longer the outsider looking in. I belonged in this world on my own merits, not as someone's plus one. How nice for you both, she said, her knuckles white around her champagne stem. Philip will be so surprised. He's just finishing up a meeting with the board. He should be joining us any minute. The prospect of seeing Philip again after all these years sent a brief flutter through my stomach. But it wasn't the devastating anxiety I once would have felt. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. It was more like the anticipation before presenting a design to a difficult client, professional, and controlled. Actually, Theo said smoothly, we should probably avoid that particular reunion tonight. Professional ethics and all, given the circumstances. Fiona's face flushed. I'm sure I don't know what you mean. That ridiculous lawsuit is based on completely fabricated claims. Philip's research is groundbreaking. The patients misunderstood the consent forms. Is that what he told you? Theo asked, his tone still pleasant but with an edge of steel beneath it. Because we have 7 former research assistants who've testified otherwise. I watched as Fiona's carefully constructed narrative began to crumble in real time. Her eyes widened slightly, and for a moment I saw a flash of the young woman I had once considered a sister, uncertain and vulnerable beneath her polished exterior. You don't know what you're talking about, she insisted, but there was no conviction in her voice. Mrs. Montgomery, a young man in a server's uniform approached us, breaking the tension. Dr. Montgomery asked me to find you. He's waiting for you in the East Wing. Relief flooded Fiona's face. Excuse me, she said stiffly. Duty calls. She turned to leave but paused. It was interesting seeing you again, Emily. Likewise, I replied. As she walked away, her back rigid with tension, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Theo turned to me, concern etched across his features. You okay? Actually, yes, I said, surprised to find it was true. That was easier than I expected. He smiled, brushing a strand of hair from my face. You're stronger than you give yourself credit for. We moved toward a quieter corner of the ballroom, away from the main crowd. I could see Fiona across the room whispering urgently to Philip, whose back was to us. Even from this distance, I could see the tension in his shoulders as she spoke. Do you think she's warning him? I asked. Theo nodded. Undoubtedly. But it doesn't matter. The evidence doesn't change based on whether he sees us tonight or not. Is it really as bad as you implied? I asked quietly. Theo rarely discussed the details of his cases with me, maintaining strict professional boundaries. His expression turned serious. Worse, actually. He falsified data to push through a cardiac procedure that wasn't ready. 3 patients died. And dozens more suffered complications that weren't disclosed as risks. The information hit me like a physical blow. I had known Philip was ambitious, had sometimes questioned his ethical flexibility, but this was beyond anything I had imagined. The man I had once planned to marry had prioritized his career over human lives. You don't seem surprised, Theo noted, studying my face. I'm not really, I admitted. There were signs I ignored, times when his ambition seemed to outweigh everything else. A server approached with a tray of champagne. Theo took 2 glasses, handing one to me. To seeing clearly, he said, touching his glass to mine. To second chances, I replied, taking a sip. As we stood there, I couldn't help but reflect on the strange twist of fate that had brought us all to this moment. 10 years ago, finding Philip and Fiona together had destroyed me. I had believed they had taken everything from me. My future, my confidence, my sense of belonging. Now I understood that they had actually set me free. Across the room, Philip finally turned, his eyes scanning the crowd until they landed on us. For a moment, our gazes locked. There was no dramatic reaction, no visible shock, just a slight narrowing of his eyes as he recognized me, then widened as they shifted to Theo. Theo raised his glass slightly in acknowledgement. Philip's expression hardened, and he turned away, guiding Fiona toward a group of older board members. It was clear he would be avoiding us for the remainder of the evening. Well, that was anticlimactic, I murmured. Theo chuckled. Were you expecting him to faint dramatically? Not exactly, I smiled. But after Fiona's reaction, I thought there might be, I don't know, something more. Men like Philip are practiced at hiding their reactions, Theo said. But trust me, he's rattled. Finding out his ex-fiancée is married to the man leading the lawsuit against him, that's going to keep him up tonight. As we mingled throughout the evening, I was acutely aware of Fiona and Philip circulating on the opposite side of the room, carefully maintaining distance. Occasionally, I would catch Fiona watching us, her expression unreadable. Once, our eyes met, and I saw something I hadn't expected, a flash of genuine sadness before she quickly looked away. Dr. and Mrs. Lancaster Monroe, a photographer, approached us. Could I get a photo for the Foundation newsletter? I started slightly at being addressed as Dr. and Mrs., a title combination I had once imagined having with Philip. Back then, I had been prepared to be Dr. and Mrs. Montgomery, with my identity subsumed under his. Now, I had kept my own name professionally, adding Theo's only in social contexts like this one. As we posed for the photo, Theo's hand warm against my back, I realized how differently things had turned out from what I had once planned. And how much better this reality was than the future I had once clung to so desperately. You're thinking deep thoughts, Theo murmured as the photographer moved on. Just reflecting on how plans change, I said. And how grateful I am that they do, he smiled, understanding in his eyes. Want to give them something else to think about? He asked, nodding discreetly toward where Fiona was watching us. What did you have in mind? In answer, he led me to the dance floor just as the string quartet began playing a waltz. As he guided me through the steps with practiced ease, I caught a glimpse of Fiona's face. Her expression a complex mixture of envy and regret. For the first time, I felt something unexpected. Pity. The memory of how Fiona and I first met was so clear it could have been yesterday, not 15 years ago. I had been struggling with my oversized suitcase on the steps of Westbridge Hall when a cheerful redhead bounded up beside me. Need a hand? These old buildings really should have elevators by now, she'd said, grabbing one end of my suitcase without waiting for a response. Thanks, I'd replied, grateful for the help. I'm Emily Lancaster. Fiona Wilson, she'd introduced herself with a dazzling smile. Looks like we're neighbors. I'm in 302. I'm 304, I'd said, surprised by the coincidence. Fate, she'd declared dramatically. We're going to be best friends. I can just tell. And somehow she'd been right. The memory faded as I stood in the bathroom of the Grand Bellevue Hotel, splashing cool water on my wrists to calm my racing pulse. The encounter with Fiona had left me more rattled than I wanted to admit. I patted, my face dry with a plush hand towel, examining my reflection in the ornate mirror. At 36, I looked better than I had at 26, more confident, more refined. The insecure young woman who had once believed her worth was tied to being Dr. Philip Montgomery's wife had disappeared, replaced by someone who knew her own value. Pull yourself together, Em, I whispered to my reflection. This isn't about them anymore. As I reapplied my lipstick, my mind drifted back to those early college days. Fiona and I had been inseparable from the start. So different, yet somehow perfectly complementary. Where I was cautious and methodical, she was spontaneous. And bold. I planned everything. She lived in the moment. Together, we balanced each other. We'd shared everything during those years, from clothes to secrets, dreams to disappointments. She'd been there when my father died in my junior year, holding me through nights of grief. I'd supported her when she failed her business ethics class, helping her appeal to avoid academic probation. By graduation, we were as close as sisters. When I was accepted to the graduate design program at Parsons and she landed a position at a boutique PR firm, it seemed natural that we would continue our journey together in New York, sharing a tiny apartment in Chelsea with mismatched furniture and big dreams. The bathroom door swung open, interrupting my reverie. A woman in her 60s entered, her silver hair elegantly styled. She paused when she saw me. "You're Emily Lancaster, aren't you? The designer who did the pediatric wing?" she asked. I nodded, pleasantly surprised to be recognized. "Yes, that's me." "Marvelous work," she said. "I'm on the hospital board. We're planning to renovate the maternity ward next year. You should submit a proposal." "I'd be honored," I replied, accepting her business card. As she disappeared into a stall, I took a deep breath and headed back to the gala. This moment was a reminder of why I was really here, not because of Philip and Fiona, but because of what I had built on my own. Theo was waiting where I'd left him, chatting with a judge he often appeared before. He excused himself when he saw me approaching. "Better?" he asked quietly. "Much," I assured him. "Sorry for the momentary retreat." "Never apologize for taking care of yourself," he said, gently squeezing my hand. "Want to call it a night? We've made our appearance." I considered it briefly, then shook my head. "Actually, no, I worked hard to be here. I'm not going to let them chase me away." Pride flashed in his eyes. "That's my girl." As we rejoined the party, my mind continued to drift between present and past. I remembered the first time I'd mentioned Philip to Fiona. We'd been having brunch at our favorite cafe, and I'd been unable to contain my excitement after meeting him at a university hospital fundraiser. "He's brilliant, Fee," I'd gushed. "He's doing this groundbreaking research on minimally invasive cardiac procedures, and he's not at all what you'd expect from someone so accomplished." "Handsome?" she'd asked, eyebrows raised. "Very," I'd admitted, with a laugh. "But also, I don't know. He listens when I talk about my designs, like he actually sees me." What I hadn't recognized then was the gleam in her eye. Not just happiness for me, but something more calculating. Fiona had always been drawn to success, to status, and Philip Montgomery, with his prestigious family name and promising medical career, represented everything she aspired to. When they'd first met at a dinner party I'd hosted in our apartment, I'd been too busy playing hostess to notice how intently she'd focused on him, how she'd positioned herself across from him at the table, how she'd laughed a little too enthusiastically at his jokes. Looking back, the signs had been there from the beginning. "Penny for your thoughts?" Theo's voice brought me back to the present. "Just remembering how it all started," I said quietly. "How naive I was." He guided me toward the terrace doors. "You weren't naive, Em. You were trusting. There's a difference." The night air was cool on my skin as we stepped outside. A few other guests were scattered around the terrace, enjoying the respite from the crowded ballroom. The city skyline glittered. Before us, a tapestry of lights against the dark sky. "I trusted her completely," I said, leaning against the stone balustrade. We shared everything. She knew my fears, my insecurities, everything that made me vulnerable. "And she used it against you," Theo said, not as a question, but as a statement of fact. I nodded slowly. When I introduced them, I was literally handing her a roadmap of how to hurt me. I just never imagined she would use it. The memory of those early days with Philip surfaced next, his charming smile when we first met, the way he'd pursued me with single-minded determination. The Montgomery family was old money, influential in both medical and social circles. I'd been flattered by his attention, surprised that someone from his world would be interested in me. "You know what's strange?" I said, turning to face Theo. "Looking back, I'm not sure Philip ever really knew me. He liked the idea of me, the supportive wife with the right background who would look good at fundraisers and dinner parties, but he never really saw me." "His loss," Theo said simply. "That's what I noticed first about you. How much there was to see." I smiled, remembering our first meeting 6 years ago. I'd been presenting my design concept for his firm's new offices. He'd asked questions no client had ever asked before, wanting to understand the psychology behind my choices, the reasoning behind every element. "Do you ever wonder how different things might have been?" Theo asked carefully. "If they hadn't betrayed you?" I considered the question, watching a boat move slowly along the distant harbor. "Sometimes. But then I wouldn't have found my way to you. And honestly, I don't think I would have found my way to myself either. I was so caught up in being what Philip wanted that I was losing sight of who I actually was." Theo nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Still, it couldn't have been easy. The way it happened." "No," I admitted. "It wasn't." The discovery of their betrayal had been devastating not just because of what I'd lost, but how I'd lost it. The memory still had the power to make my chest tighten, even after all these years. "We should head back in," I said, straightening my shoulders. "I spotted the Harrismans earlier. They mentioned they're looking to redesign their Aspen property." Theo smiled at my deliberate change of subject. "Always the professional." "It's how I survived," I said simply. "One foot in front of the other, one project at a time." As we turned to re-enter the ballroom, I caught sight of Fiona watching us from just inside the doors. Our eyes met briefly before she turned away, disappearing into the crowd. "You know," Theo said as we walked back into the light and music, "some people never face consequences for the pain they cause others. But sometimes, life has a way of balancing the scales." I glanced across the room to where Philip stood, now deep in conversation with what appeared to be a group of hospital administrators. His posture was rigid, his smile forced. Whatever Fiona had told him about us, it had clearly disrupted his evening. "Yes," I agreed. "Sometimes it does." "I can't believe he proposed," Fiona squealed, grabbing my left hand to examine the emerald-cut diamond that now adorned my finger. We were sitting in our favorite cafe, the morning light streaming through the windows and catching the facets of the ring. "It's absolutely gorgeous, Em." It was 2 years after I'd first met Philip at the university hospital fundraiser. We'd been dating for 18 months, and his proposal the night before had been everything I'd dreamed of. A private dinner at Le Bernardin, followed by a walk through Central Park where he'd gotten down on one knee under the stars. "I still can't believe it myself," I admitted, a flush of happiness warming my cheeks. "We're thinking about a spring wedding next year." "That's perfect," Fiona said, her eyes bright with excitement. "You know I have to be your maid of honor, right? Non-negotiable." "As if I'd choose anyone else," I laughed. "You've been there for every moment of this relationship. I couldn't imagine having anyone else by my side." It was true. Fiona had been my sounding board through every stage, from analyzing our first date to helping me choose outfits for important dinners with Philip's colleagues. She'd listened to my insecurities about fitting into his world and had consistently boosted my confidence with unwavering support. "The Montgomerys are practically medical royalty," she said, stirring her latte. "You're going to be Dr. and Mrs. Montgomery. Do you have any idea how many doors this is going to open for you?" I remembered feeling a flicker of unease at her emphasis on Philip's status rather than our happiness, but I'd dismissed it. That was just Fiona, always thinking about connections and opportunities. It was part of what made her so successful in PR. "I'm more focused on the fact that I love him," I said gently, "and he loves me." Of course," she backtracked, reaching across to squeeze my hand. "That's the most important thing. I'm just saying this is huge, Em. You're going to have the life we always talked about." The memory dissolved as I stood in the present, watching Philip across the ballroom of the Grand Bellevue. He was now speaking with the hospital's chief of surgery, their heads bent close in what appeared to be an intense conversation. Even from this distance, I could see the tension in his stance, the forced casualness in his gestures. "They look worried," I murmured to Theo. "They should be," he replied quietly. "The evidence we've gathered is substantial. The hospital's legal team has been trying to negotiate a settlement for weeks. I studied Philip's profile, trying to reconcile the man I saw now with the one I had once planned to marry. He looked older, of course, his dark hair now threaded with silver at the temples. But there was something else different about him, a hardness that perhaps had always been there, but that I'd been too in love to recognize. "It's strange," I said, seeing him now and realizing how little I actually knew him. Theo's eyes were thoughtful. "We rarely see people clearly when we're in love with the idea of them." His words struck a chord. That had been exactly my mistake. Falling. In love with the idea of Philip Montgomery, brilliant doctor and perfect husband material, rather than seeing the real man with all his flaws and ambitions. The months after our engagement had been a whirlwind of joy and planning. Philip had introduced me to his world with pride, and I had thrown myself into becoming the perfect partner for a rising medical star. I'd attended charity galas and hospital functions, learning to navigate the complex social dynamics of his professional circle. Meanwhile, Fiona had become increasingly involved in our lives. She'd volunteered to help with wedding planning, accompanying me to vendor meetings and dress fittings. Philip had even helped her secure a position in the hospital's public relations department, bringing her into his professional orbit as well. "You've got to see these floral arrangements." Fiona's voice echoed from the past, as I remembered her bursting into our apartment with sample photos from the florist. "I think the white peonies with touches of greenery would be perfect for your spring theme." She'd been so invested in every detail, sometimes seeming even more excited than I was. I'd been grateful for her enthusiasm, interpreting it as the support of a true friend. How blind I had been. "Dr. Monroe?" A voice broke through my thoughts. A woman in her 50s with an elegant bob and sharp eyes was approaching us. "I'm Dr. Elise Weber, Chief of Pediatrics at Wellington." Theo shook her hand. "A pleasure to meet you, Dr. Weber. And please, it's Theo. I wanted to personally thank your wife for her extraordinary work on our pediatric wing," she said, turning to me. "The environment you created has measurably improved our patient outcomes. Children actually look forward to coming to their appointments. Now," pride warmed my chest. "That means everything to hear. Creating spaces that heal was the entire goal of the project." Dr. Weber lowered her voice slightly. "I should also mention that not all of us at Wellington are aligned with Dr. Montgomery's research practices. Some of us have been raising concerns internally for quite some time." Theo nodded, his expression carefully neutral. "I appreciate your candor, Dr. Weber." "The truth matters in medicine," she said simply, "as does accountability." With a meaningful look between us, she excused herself to rejoin a group of colleagues. "That was interesting," I murmured to Theo once she was out of earshot. "Very," he agreed. "The hospital administration is presenting a united front publicly, but clearly there are internal divisions." As we continued mingling, I found myself drawn back into memories of that golden period before everything fell apart. Philip and I had been planning our future together, a brownstone in the city, perhaps children in a few years, my design career developing alongside his medical one. I had believed we were building something lasting and real. One particular memory surfaced, a rare Saturday when both Philip and I had the day free. We'd spent the morning at the Museum of Modern Art, then walked through Central Park, talking about everything and nothing. "I never thought I'd find someone who fits so perfectly into my life," he'd said, his arm around my shoulders as we watched model sailboats on the conservatory water. "You understand the demands of my career. You charm everyone you meet, and you're creating your own success. You're exactly what I need, Emily." At the time, I'd taken it as a beautiful compliment. Now, with years of distance and clarity, I recognized the subtle warning sign in his words. He'd been focused on how I fit into his life, how I met his needs, not on who I was as a person, separate from what I could be for him. Looking up, I realized Fiona was watching us again from across the room. This time, she didn't look away when our eyes met. Instead, after a moment's hesitation, she began walking toward us, determination in her stride. "Incoming," I murmured. To Theo, who followed my gaze and straightened slightly. "Emily," Fiona said as she reached us, her voice artificially bright. "I was hoping to catch you alone for a moment, for old time's sake." Theo's posture shifted subtly, protective. "Is that a good idea?" "It's okay," I assured him, though my heart had begun beating faster. "I can handle this." He studied my face. For a moment, then nodded. "I'll be right over there with Judge Kaplan if you need me," he said, squeezing my hand before stepping away. Fiona watched him go, something unreadable in her expression. "He seems devoted," she said, a note of surprise in her voice. "He is," I replied simply. "What did you want to talk about, Fiona?" She glanced around, then gestured toward a relatively quiet corner near the terrace doors. "Could we—" I followed her, maintaining a careful emotional distance despite our physical proximity. The woman beside me looked like my former best friend, but she felt like a stranger, or worse, like someone who had once known exactly how to hurt me and had chosen to do so. When we reached the corner, she turned to face me, her composure slightly fractured. "I didn't expect to see you here tonight," she began. "Clearly," I replied, unable to keep a hint of dryness from my tone. She had the grace to look uncomfortable. "Emily, about what happened—" "It was 10 years ago," I interrupted. "Ancient history." Her eyes searched my face. "Is it, though? You married the lawyer who's trying to destroy my husband's career. That seems deliberate." I felt a flash of anger. "Not everything is about you, Fiona, or Philip. Theo and I met years after I left New York, completely independent of any connection to either of you. The fact that his firm took on this case is coincidental." "Is it?" she challenged, doubt clear in her voice. "Yes," I said firmly. Though I understand why someone who orchestrated betrayal might have difficulty believing in coincidence. She flinched, slightly at my words. "I deserved that," she admitted after a moment. "But there are things you don't know, Emily. About what happened back then. About Philip." I studied her face, noting the fine lines of strain around her eyes, the tightness in her smile that hadn't been there earlier in the evening. "You're right," I said evenly. "There are many things I don't know, and I've made peace with that. I think Philip is working too much," I confided to Fiona, as we sat on our apartment's tiny balcony, sharing a bottle of wine on a warm summer evening 6 months into my engagement. "He canceled our dinner plans again last night. 3rd time this month." Fiona swirled the Cabernet in her glass thoughtfully. "He's on the verge of a major breakthrough with his research. You know how important this is for his career." "I know," I sighed, gazing out at the city lights. "And I'm trying to be supportive. It's just, sometimes I feel like I'm engaged to a ghost." "That's the life of a doctor's wife," she reminded, me with a gentle pat on my arm. "Better get used to it now. Besides, he's doing important work. That cardiac procedure could change lives." There was something in her tone, an enthusiasm that seemed excessive, even for Fiona. I glanced at her, curiously. "You sound like his PR agent," she laughed, a touch too quickly. "Well, that's basically my job now. The hospital wants to position him as their rising star once the research is published." "You've been spending a lot of time at the hospital lately," I observed casually. "Just doing my job," she replied, not quite meeting my eyes. "Someone's got to make your future husband famous." I remembered feeling a vague unease at her words, at the slight flush that colored her cheeks when she mentioned Philip, but I'd dismissed it, attributing it to the wine and my own insecurities. Now, standing in the quiet corner of the Grand Bellevue ballroom with Fiona, that memory took on new significance. "What things don't I know about Philip?" I asked, returning to her cryptic statement. "And why would you tell me now, after all this time?" Fiona glanced around nervously, as if ensuring no one could overhear us. "The research that made his career, the minimally invasive procedure, there were problems with the data, early on. And you're just now having an attack of conscience about it?" I asked skeptically. Her eyes flashed. "It wasn't like that. I believed in him, in his vision. We all did. The procedure works, Emily. It saved thousands of lives." "But not everyone's," I said quietly. "That's what Theo's lawsuit is about, isn't it? The patients who weren't so lucky." She looked away, her profile sharp against the soft lighting of the ballroom. "Medical advancement always comes with risk. You can't make an omelet without breaking eggs." The callousness of her statement stunned me. Those eggs were people. Fiona, with families. "I know that," she snapped, then immediately composed herself. "I know, but Philip was trying to do something important, something that would help more people than it hurt. And that justifies falsifying data? Hiding risks from patients?" Her silence was answer enough. "Why are you telling me this?" I pressed. "Are you trying to justify what you did? Stealing my fiancé because his ambition aligned with yours?" Pain flashed across her face. "It wasn't that simple." "Then explain it to me," I challenged. "After 10 years, I think I deserve that much." She took a deep breath, her fingers tightening around her champagne glass. "I fell in love with him. I didn't mean to, but I did. And he what? He saw something in me that he said he'd been looking for," she finished, her voice barely above a whisper. "A partner who would do whatever it took to help him succeed, who understood what real ambition looked like." The implication hung in the air between us, that I hadn't been that partner, that I'd had limits Philip found inconvenient, and Fiona did not. "I remember when things started to change," I said slowly, memories flooding back. "About 8 months, before the wedding, you both started acting differently. Philip became distant, always working late. And you—" "I what?" she asked, an edge to her voice. "You became his shadow," I said simply. "Always at the hospital, always talking about his research, always ensuring you were included in our plans. At the time, I thought you were just being supportive of both of us." A waiter passed by, offering champagne. We both declined. "Did you know," I continued, "that about 5 months before I found you together, I actually wondered if something was happening?" I asked Philip point blank if there was someone else. Fiona's eyes widened slightly. "What did he say?" He seemed genuinely shocked at the suggestion. He held my hands and said I was being ridiculous, that he was just focused on his research. I laughed softly, without humor. He was always a convincing liar. "Emily." "And then he suggested I talk to you about my irrational fears," I continued, the memory crystallizing as I spoke. "He said you could reassure me because you saw him at the hospital every day and knew how hard he was working. He actually used my trust in you to cover your affair." Fiona's face paled. "I didn't know he did that." "Really?" "Because I called you that same night. Remember?" I was almost in tears, confessing my fears about Philip being distant. "And you told me I was being insecure, that Philip adored me, that I needed to be more understanding of the pressures he was under." She looked away. "I remember." "You gaslit me," I said quietly. "Both of you, for months." Across the room, I could see Theo watching us, concern evident in his posture. I gave him a small nod to indicate I was okay. "We were wrong," Fiona finally admitted. "The way we handled it was wrong. I've known that for years." "Then why did you approach me tonight with that smug comment about my being single? Why continue the pretense that you have the perfect life when your husband is facing serious legal Trouble? She closed her eyes briefly. Habit, she said. The habit of pretending everything is perfect. For the first time, I really looked, at the woman standing before me. Beyond the designer dress and expensive jewelry, I saw the strain in her features, the carefully concealed anxiety. The Fiona I'd known in college had been vibrant and carefree. This woman seemed brittle somehow. Are you happy, Fiona? I asked, the question emerging before I could stop it. Her eyes snapped to mine, startled by the unexpected query. For a moment, I thought she might respond with her typical bravado. Instead, something in her expression cracked. I don't know, she whispered. I haven't asked myself that question in a very long time. The honesty of her response caught me off guard. I had expected defensiveness, not vulnerability. The life you envied all those years ago, being Dr. Montgomery's wife, having the prestige and the connections, it came with a price, she continued. Philip is not an easy man to be married to. No, I agreed softly. I don't imagine he would be. A weighted silence fell between us, heavy with shared history and divergent paths. When did you first realize? I began, then paused, uncertain if I really wanted the answer. That I had feelings for him? She finished for me. Or that he had them for me. Both, I suppose. She twisted the diamond wedding band on her finger. I admired him from the moment. You introduced us. His intelligence, his ambition, his certainty about his place in the world. But I didn't act on it. I wouldn't have. Not until... Until what? Until he told me about his doubts, she said. About marrying you. The admission still had the power to sting, even after all these years. When was this? About 7 months before your wedding date. He said he cared about you, but wasn't sure you truly understood the life he was working toward. He said you had limitations. Limitations, I repeated, tasting the bitterness of the word. Your ethical concerns about some of his research methods, she clarified. Your desire for him to spend more time away from work. Your hesitation about certain social obligations he felt were necessary for his career. I almost laughed. You mean my limitations were that I had boundaries and wanted a balanced relationship? She didn't answer directly. He found in me someone who would prioritize his vision above everything else, who understood that sometimes rules need to be bent to achieve greatness. The picture she painted was becoming clearer. So you became his accomplice, not just his lover. Her expression hardened slightly. I became his partner, in every sense. And now, with the lawsuit pending and his career in jeopardy? Something flickered in her eyes, fear perhaps. We'll get through it. We always do. But there was a hollowness to her confident assertion that told me more than her words did. I should get back to Philip, she said, straightening her shoulders. He'll be wondering where I've gone. As she turned to leave, I found myself saying, Fiona? She paused, looking back at me questioningly. Whatever happens with the lawsuit, I hope you find a way to be happy. Really happy, not just the appearance of it. Surprise registered on her face, followed by something that might have been gratitude. You always were better than me, she said softly, then walked away, disappearing into the crowd of glittering guests. It was a rainy Tuesday when my world collapsed. I remember every detail with perfect clarity, the steady drumming of water against the windows, the faint smell of coffee lingering in our apartment, the stack of wedding invitation samples, waiting on the dining table for my final selection. Philip had canceled our dinner plans again, citing an emergency at the hospital. It wasn't unusual. As his research gained momentum, our time together had become increasingly scarce. But that evening, a nagging feeling I couldn't shake propelled me to action. I'm going to surprise him, I told myself, gathering my umbrella and the container of homemade pasta I'd prepared. He needs to eat, even during emergencies. The taxi dropped me at Wellington Memorial's imposing entrance. I'd visited often enough that the security guard nodded in recognition as I passed, my heels clicking against the polished floor as I made my way to the research wing where Philip's office was located. The hallway was quiet, most of the staff having departed hours earlier. Light spilled from beneath Philip's door, a strip of gold in the dimly lit corridor. I approached quietly, planning to surprise him with both my presence and the warm meal. I didn't knock. That single decision, reaching for the handle instead of announcing myself, altered the course of my life irrevocably. The door swung open silently on well-oiled hinges, revealing a scene that stopped my heart. Philip was there, but he wasn't working. He was sitting on the edge of his desk, with Fiona standing between his legs, her arms wound around his neck, his hands on her waist. They were kissing deeply, lost in each other, completely unaware of my presence. The container slipped from my numb fingers, hitting the floor with a dull thud that finally alerted them to my presence. They broke apart, turning toward me with matching expressions of shock. "Emily," Philip recovered first, straightening and putting distance between himself and Fiona. "This isn't—" "Don't," I interrupted, my voice eerily calm despite the hurricane raging inside me. "Don't insult me by saying this isn't what it looks like." Fiona's face had drained of color, but she didn't speak, didn't attempt to explain or apologize. Her silence was another betrayal, cutting as deeply as the scene I'd witnessed. "How long?" I asked, the calm in my voice belying the trembling of my hands. Philip exchanged a glance with Fiona. "Emily, let's discuss this privately. This isn't the place." "How long?" I repeated, each word precisely enunciated. 3 months, he finally admitted. Something about the specificity of his answer, not recently or it just happened, told me he was lying. The affair had been going on longer. "I see," I said, though I didn't. Not really. I couldn't comprehend how the two people I trusted most in the world could do this to me. "And were you planning to call off our wedding, or just continue this? Behind my back? Emily, you're upset. Let me take you home and we can talk about this rationally," Philip said, using the same soothing tone he probably employed with agitated patients. "Rationally," I echoed, a bubble of hysterical laughter rising in my throat. "You want to rationally discuss how you and my best friend have been sleeping together while helping me plan our wedding?" Fiona finally spoke, her voice small. "I'm so sorry. We never meant to hurt you." The platitude ignited something in me. "You never meant to hurt me? What exactly did you think would happen when I found out my fiancé and maid of honor were having an affair? That I'd be thrilled for you both?" "We were going to tell you," Philip said, his composure slipping slightly. "After the Jenkins conference, this weekend, we just needed to figure out the right way to approach it." "The right way," I repeated, the words hollow. "There is no right way to tell someone you've betrayed them completely." I looked between them, Philip with his carefully controlled expression, and Fiona with tears now streaming down her face. In that moment, a strange clarity descended. These people were strangers to me. Whatever I had believed about them, about us, had been an illusion. "The wedding is off," I said flatly. "Obviously. Emily, don't make hasty decisions. We can work through this," Philip urged, taking a step toward me. I backed away. "There's nothing to work through, Philip. You've made your choice." My gaze shifted to Fiona. "And so have you. I hope you'll be very happy together. You deserve each other." With that, I turned and walked out, leaving behind the container of pasta spilled across the pristine hospital floor, a fitting metaphor for the mess they had made of my life. I didn't cry in the taxi ride home, or while I packed a suitcase with essentials, or even when I called my mother to tell her I was coming to stay for a while. The tears came later, when I was safely on a train heading out of the city, watching the Manhattan skyline recede in the distance. They came in a flood then, hot and relentless, my body finally processing what my mind was still struggling to accept. 10 years later, standing in the ballroom of the Grand Bellevue, the memory of that night still had the power to make my chest tighten. But the pain had long since been replaced by something else, understanding. Understanding that their betrayal, as devastating as it had been, had set me free from a life and relationship that would have slowly diminished me. "You okay?" Theo appeared at my side, handing me a fresh glass of sparkling water. That looked intense. It was, I admitted, taking a grateful sip. Fiona just confirmed what we already suspected about Philip's research. She also inadvertently revealed that their marriage isn't exactly the fairy tale she pretends it is. Theo's expression was thoughtful. People rarely get away with their choices forever. Consequences have a way of finding us all eventually. Across the room, I could see Philip engaged in what appeared to be a tense conversation with a distinguished older man I recognized as the chairman of the hospital board. Fiona stood slightly apart, her smile fixed, but her eyes anxious as she watched the exchange. "What do you think will happen?" I asked Theo quietly. "With the lawsuit? Wellington will settle," he replied with certainty. "The evidence is too damning. And they know it. The real question is whether the medical board will revoke Philip's license." The thought should have given me satisfaction, a form of justice for the betrayal I had suffered. Instead, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. Vindication, yes, but also a strange sort of pity for the man who had once been the center of my world. "Would it be terrible to admit that I don't wish that on him?" I asked. "As much as he hurt me, I don't want to see his career destroyed." Theo's eyes softened. "That's not terrible, Em. It's compassionate. It's one of the things I love most about you. Your capacity for empathy, even toward those who don't deserve it." I leaned against him slightly, drawing strength from his steady presence. After I left New York, I spent months fantasizing about revenge, ways to hurt them as deeply as they had hurt me. But eventually, I realized that living well, truly well, not just the appearance of it, was the only revenge that wouldn't poison me in the process. "And you've certainly accomplished that," Theo said, pride evident in his voice. The memory of those first months after the betrayal surfaced, the raw pain, the humiliation of canceling the wedding, the struggle to rebuild my sense of self. I had retreated to my mother's house in Connecticut, barely leaving my childhood bedroom for weeks. The wedding dress hung in the closet, a painful reminder of dreams shattered. But then came the pivotal moment, the day I finally made the decision that would alter my course. I'd been listlessly scrolling through social media when I came across a photo Fiona had posted. She and Philip at some charity event, her hand possessively on his arm, both smiling brilliantly for the camera. The caption read, "Supporting my brilliant fiancé at the Medical Innovation Gala. Blessed loving life." They were already engaged, barely 2 months after my world had imploded. The diamond on her finger was larger than the one Philip had given me, ostentatious in a way that suited Fiona's taste more than mine ever had. Something snapped inside me as I stared at that image. Not in a destructive way, but in a clarifying one, like a fever breaking. I realized with sudden certainty that I had 2 choices. I could continue to let their betrayal define me, or I could use it as a catalyst to create something new. That same day, I applied to the advanced design program I'd been considering before my engagement, the one Philip had subtly discouraged because it would have required too much of my time and attention. I called a former professor who had connections at design firms in Seattle, as far from New York as I could reasonably go, and I deleted all my social media accounts, cutting off my view into their new life together. It wasn't a dramatic declaration of war. It was a quiet decision to redirect my energy from what I had lost to what I could create. That day changed everything for me, I told Theo, finishing the story I'd shared with him in pieces over the years of our relationship. It wasn't about them anymore. It was about me, what I wanted, who I wanted to be. And look what you've built, he said softly. A thriving design firm, a reputation for excellence, and clients who value not just your aesthetic, but your integrity. And you, I added, meeting his gaze. I found you. He smiled, the warmth in his eyes dispelling the last shadows of the past. We found each other, and I'm grateful every day for that. The orchestra began playing a waltz, the elegant melody filling the ballroom. Theo extended his hand. Dance with me? As we moved across the floor, I caught a glimpse of Philip watching us, his expression unreadable. Fiona stood beside him, her hand on his arm in a gesture that now seemed more restraining than affectionate. He's watching us, I murmured too. Theo! Let him, Theo replied, drawing me closer. Let him see exactly what he lost. In that moment, with Theo's arms around me and the music sweeping us along, I felt the final piece of my healing click into place. The story of Philip and Fiona's betrayal was no longer my defining narrative. It was simply a chapter in a much larger, richer story, one that I continued to write on my own terms, and that I realized was the true victory, not the fact that they might finally face consequences for their actions, but that I had long since moved beyond needing them to. The month after discovering Philip and Fiona together in his office was a blur of pain and practicalities. There were calls to vendors canceling wedding arrangements, awkward explanations to puzzled relatives, and the logistical nightmare of untangling my life from the one I had planned with Philip. I had moved out of our shared apartment in Manhattan to my mother's house in Connecticut, leaving behind furniture, memories, and the life I had carefully constructed. The engagement ring, which I had once thought would never leave my finger, sat in its velvet box on my childhood dresser, a glittering reminder of promises broken. You need to send it back to him, my mother had said gently one evening, finding me staring at the open box, the emerald-cut diamond catching the lamplight. Keeping it is just keeping the wound open. I knew she was right, but something in me resisted. Returning the ring felt like the final acknowledgement that it was over, that the future I had envisioned was truly gone. But it wasn't just the broken engagement that hollowed me out. It was the loss of Fiona, my best friend, my confidant, the person who had been my constant through nearly a decade of life. Her betrayal cut even deeper than Philip's in some ways. He had been in my life for 2 years. She had been my anchor for much longer. I discovered the full extent of their deception in pieces over those first few weeks. Friends called, hesitantly revealing that they had seen Philip and Fiona together on occasions when both had claimed to be working late. A nurse from the hospital reached out, apologetically explaining that their relationship had been an open secret in certain circles for months. I assumed you had an arrangement, she'd said uncomfortably. Otherwise, I would have said something. The most painful revelation came from my old roommate Ava, who had remained in our shared apartment after I moved in with Philip. I can't keep this from you anymore, she confessed over coffee, her eyes filled with apprehension. Fiona was bringing Philip to our apartment when you were out of town for design conferences. It started almost a year ago. A year. Not the 3 months Philip had claimed. Not a recent development or a moment of weakness, but a calculated, long-term deception by both of them. The betrayal was complete. While I had been planning our wedding, sharing my insecurities with my best friend, and building what I thought was a life with the man I loved, they had been carrying on behind my back. Not just an affair, but an elaborate web of lies that made me question every interaction, every memory, every moment I had shared with either of them. And then came the social media announcement that nearly broke me. 6 weeks after I caught them together, Fiona posted a glittering engagement announcement on Instagram. The caption read, "When you know, you know. So excited to become Mrs. Dr. Montgomery. Engaged to the man of my dreams." The diamond on her finger was larger than mine had been, ostentatious in the way Fiona had always preferred. The photo showed them on a yacht, champagne flutes in hand, the Manhattan skyline serving as backdrop. They looked radiant, triumphant, as if their relationship had been a straightforward love story rather than one built on betrayal. Comments. Flooded in. Congratulations from colleagues. Excitement from mutual friends who either didn't know the full story or chose to ignore it. The casual cruelty of it staggered me. Not only had they betrayed me, but they were now rewriting the narrative, erasing me from their story as if I had never existed. I shut down my social media accounts that same day. I still can't believe they got engaged so quickly after everything happened, Theo said, pulling me back to the present. We had moved to a quiet corner of the ballroom, momentarily retreating from the bustle of the gala. In retrospect, it makes perfect sense, I replied. They needed to legitimize their relationship as quickly as possible. An engagement transformed them from affair partners to a love story. Theo's expression was contemplative. How did you hear about their wedding? That must have been another blow. I smiled wryly. Actually, by then I was in Seattle starting my new life. I only found out when a mutual friend mentioned it in passing during a phone call, clearly unaware that I didn't know. By that point, I was 6 months into my advanced design program and had just landed my first major project. I remember feeling not happy, exactly, but not devastated either. Progress, Theo noted with a gentle smile. Slow progress, I acknowledged. There were still bad days. Days when I'd see a couple that reminded me of us, or when a wedding invitation would arrive for someone else's happy day, but they became less frequent. Across the ballroom, I noticed Philip and Fiona preparing to leave, their body language tense despite the social smiles fixed on their faces. Philip's hand was at the small of Fiona's back, guiding her toward the exit with what appeared to be practiced urgency. They're leaving, I observed. Theo followed my gaze. Not surprising. The board chairman probably advised Philip to make himself scarce once he realized you were here with me. The hospital's legal team would be having fits knowing he's in the same room as the lead attorney on the malpractice case. I'm surprised they stayed as long as they did, I mused. Appearances, Theo said simply. In their world, leaving early from an event like this would be an admission of weakness. They'd rather endure discomfort than show vulnerability. His insight struck me as profoundly true. Philip and Fiona had always been consumed with appearances, with the image they projected to the world. It was what had drawn them together, and what now seemed to be holding them in a gilded cage of their own making. As they reached the ballroom doors, Fiona looked back, her eyes finding mine across the crowded room. For a brief moment, something passed between us, an acknowledgement perhaps, or a question unasked. Then Philip's hand at her waist urged her forward, and they disappeared into the hotel lobby. An unexpected weight lifted from my shoulders with their departure. I hadn't realized how much tension I had been carrying, knowing they were in the same room until it was suddenly gone. You know what's strange? I said to Theo. For years after the betrayal, I imagined this moment, seeing them again, showing them I was fine, maybe even better than fine. I thought it would feel more, I don't know, triumphant. And it doesn't? He asked curiously. I considered the question. It does, in a way. But mostly, I just feel sad for them. They got what they wanted, each other, status, recognition, but they don't seem happy. The price of getting what you want through deception, Theo said quietly, is never being able to fully trust in it. They'll always wonder if what happened to you could happen to them. The wisdom of his observation resonated deeply. I had never considered that aspect of their betrayal, the seed of doubt it must have planted in their own relationship. If Philip could cheat with Fiona, might he not cheat on Fiona? If she could betray her best friend, what else might she be capable of? In those dark months after discovering their affair, I had felt like I had lost everything. My fiancé, my best friend, my place in our social circle, the future I had planned, all gone in an instant. The grief had been all-consuming, a physical ache that followed me through days that blurred into each other. I remembered one particularly low moment, about 3 months after the betrayal, when I had run into a mutual acquaintance at a cafe in Connecticut. She had asked about wedding preparations, clearly unaware of what had happened. When I explained the situation in halting words, her expression had shifted from shock to pity. "Oh, Emily," she had said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "You poor thing. Are you okay?" The pity in her eyes had been unbearable, worse somehow than the pain of the betrayal itself. I wasn't poor Emily, the victim of a cruel deception, or at least I didn't want to be. That moment in the cafe had crystallized something for me. I didn't want pity. I didn't want to be defined by what had been done to me. I wanted to be defined by what I would do next. That was when I decided to apply to the design program in Seattle, I told Theo, continuing the story. I needed a clean break, not just from Philip and Fiona, but from being seen as their victim. "It was brave," Theo said, his eyes warm with admiration. "Moving across the country, starting over. Not everyone could have done that." I shook my head slightly. It wasn't bravery so much as self-preservation. I couldn't heal in an environment where everyone knew what had happened, where I might run into them at any moment. I needed space to figure out who I was without them. "And who did you discover you were?" he asked, genuinely curious. The question made me smile. Someone stronger than I knew. Someone with ambitions beyond being Dr. Montgomery's wife. Someone who could build a life on her own terms. The orchestra began playing a slower melody, drawing couples to the dance floor for the final numbers of the evening. Theo extended his hand to me. "Dance with me one more time before we call it a night?" As we swayed together beneath the crystal chandeliers, I found myself reflecting on the strange circular nature of life. 10 years ago, I had believed that Philip's betrayal was the end of my story. Instead, it had been merely a painful chapter in a much longer, richer narrative. The woman I had become in the aftermath, more resilient, more authentic, more confident in her own worth, was someone I might never have discovered had my engagement proceeded as planned. The design career I had built, the life I now led with Theo, the sense of purpose I had found, none of it would exist in the same form if I had become Mrs. Dr. Montgomery. "What are you thinking about?" Theo murmured, his cheek against my hair. "How sometimes the worst thing that happens to you can lead to the best things in your life," I replied honestly. "If Philip hadn't betrayed me with Fiona, I might never have found my way to you." His arms tightened around me. "Then I owe them a debt of gratitude, though I doubt they'd appreciate the sentiment." I laughed softly, the sound lost in the music surrounding us. "No, I don't imagine they would." As the song drew to a close, I caught sight of our reflection. In one of the ballroom's ornate mirrors, Theo and I moving in perfect synchrony, his tall frame complementing mine, our expressions peaceful and content. We fit together, not because one of us had altered ourselves to accommodate the other, but because we had each arrived in the relationship as whole, complete individuals. It was, I realized, everything I had ever truly wanted. Not the status of being a doctor's wife, but the joy of being truly seen and valued for exactly who I was. Seattle greeted me with relentless rain that first winter, a fitting backdrop for the gray emptiness I carried within. I had rented a small studio apartment in an older building, near the design school, the kind of place where the radiator clanged at odd hours and the floorboards creaked with every step. It was nothing like the sleek Manhattan apartment I had shared with Philip or the trendy Chelsea space I'd once inhabited with Fiona. This space was wholly mine, imperfect, modest, and untainted by betrayal. During those first few months, I existed rather than lived. I attended classes, completed assignments, and went through the necessary motions of daily life. But a fog of numbness surrounded me, a protective barrier between my wounded heart and the world around me. Sleep eluded me most nights. I would lie awake, replaying memories, searching for signs I might have missed, moments when I should have realized what was happening. Had there been a change in the way Philip kissed me goodbye? Had Fiona's enthusiasm for our wedding planning been overcompensation for her guilt? The questions circled endlessly, offering no peace, no closure. The hardest part wasn't losing Philip, I confessed to Theo as we walked through the hotel lobby, preparing to leave the gala. It was the constant questioning of my own judgment. If I could be so completely wrong about the two people I trusted most, how could I trust myself about anything? Theo nodded thoughtfully, helping me into my coat. That's the most insidious aspect of betrayal. It doesn't just break your heart, it breaks your ability to trust. Exactly, I said, grateful for his understanding. I started second-guessing everything. Maybe I wasn't actually talented as a designer. Maybe all my other friendships were as superficial as mine with Fiona had turned out to be. Maybe I wasn't worthy of genuine love. The doorman hailed a taxi for us, and as we settled into the back seat, I continued sharing this chapter of my journey, one I rarely revisited but felt compelled to express tonight. I hit rock bottom about 4 months after moving to Seattle, I said, gazing out at the city lights blurring past the window. I missed a major project deadline because I couldn't focus. My professor, this intimidating woman who rarely showed emotion, called me into her office. I was sure she was going to tell me I wasn't cut out for the program. What happened? Theo prompted gently when I paused. She sat me down and said, Emily, grief is normal. Heartbreak is normal. What isn't normal is letting someone else's betrayal steal your future as well as your past. Then she handed me a business card for a therapist and told me I had 2 weeks to get my head straight or reconsider my place in the program. Tough love, Theo observed. But exactly what I needed, I acknowledged. I called the therapist that same day. Dr. Marissa Lambert had become my lifeline during those dark days. A no-nonsense woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a direct manner. She had guided me through the labyrinth of grief and betrayal. She hadn't offered empty platitudes or promised that time would heal all wounds. Instead, she had given me practical tools to navigate my pain and challenged me to examine the beliefs about myself that had made me vulnerable to people like Philip and Fiona. You allowed Philip to define your worth, she had said during one particularly difficult session. And you gave Fiona power over your sense of belonging. The question isn't why they betrayed you, Emily. The question is why you outsourced your self-worth to them in the first place. Her words had stung, but they had also illuminated a truth I had been avoiding. That part of my devastation stemmed from having built my identity around being Philip's fiancé and Fiona's best friend. Without those roles, I had felt not just betrayed, but erased. Therapy was brutal at first, I told Theo as our taxi navigated the late-night traffic. Marissa didn't let me stay comfortable in victimhood. She kept pushing me to examine my own patterns, my own choices. That couldn't have been easy, he said, his thumb tracing gentle circles on the back of my hand. It wasn't. There were sessions I left in tears, convinced she was just being cruel. But gradually, I started to see what she was doing. She was helping me reclaim my power by showing me where I had given it away. One breakthrough had come when Marissa had asked me to describe what I wanted in my future. Not the future I had planned with Philip, but the future I would choose for myself if there were no constraints. I had struggled to answer, realizing, with a jolt, that I had adapted my dreams to fit Philip's life plan so completely that I barely knew what I wanted independently of him. The recognition had been both terrifying and liberating. I remember sitting in her office, completely unable to articulate my own dreams. I said to Theo, It was as if someone had asked me to speak a language I'd forgotten. That's when I understood how much of myself I had compromised, even before the betrayal. That's a common pattern in unbalanced relationships, Theo noted. One person's dreams become subordinate to the other's. Exactly. And the worst part was, Philip had never explicitly asked me to do that. I had done it willingly, believing it was what love required. I shook my head at the memory. Marissa helped me see that real love expands you. It doesn't diminish you. The taxi pulled up to our hotel, and we fell silent as we made our way through the lobby to the elevator. It wasn't until we were inside our room, the door closed behind us, that I continued. The design program became my salvation, I said, slipping off my heels with a sigh of relief. I threw myself into it completely, channeling all my pain and confusion into my work. And something unexpected happened. My designs got better. They became more authentic, more emotionally resonant. Theo loosened his tie, watching me with attentive eyes. Pain has a way of deepening creative expression. It does, I agreed. My professor, the same one who had given me the ultimatum, pulled me aside after a project presentation and said my work had taken on a depth it lacked before. Whatever you're going through, she told me, don't waste it. Use it. That advice had become my mantra during those dark months. I used my pain, transforming it into designs that connected with people on an emotional level. I created spaces that offered both sanctuary and possibility, perhaps because that was what I so desperately needed myself. Slowly, the fog began to lift. There were still bad days, days when a happy couple would trigger memories of what I had lost, or when a wedding invitation would arrive for someone else's joyful day. But they became less frequent, less overwhelming. 6 months after moving to Seattle, I took Dr. Lambert's advice and joined a hiking group, forcing myself to engage socially again. The first outing had been awkward, my social muscles atrophied from isolation. But by the third hike, I found myself laughing genuinely at a fellow hiker's joke, the sound surprising me with its authenticity. That was when I knew I would survive. This, I told Theo, who had changed into more comfortable clothes and was now sitting beside me on the edge of the hotel bed. That moment of genuine laughter felt like coming up for air after being underwater for so long. He nodded, understanding in his eyes. Healing isn't linear. It comes in moments like that. Little breakthroughs that show you're still capable. Of joy? Exactly, I smiled, touched by his insight. The pain didn't disappear entirely, but it stopped defining me. I started having good days between the bad ones, and eventually, the good days outnumbered the bad. By the end of my first year in Seattle, I had begun to build a new life. Different from the one I had planned, but increasingly one I valued. I had formed new friendships, cautiously at first, then with growing confidence. I had excelled in my program, earning recognition for my innovative approaches to spatial design. I had even begun dating again, tentative exploratory coffees that sometimes led nowhere, but occasionally offered pleasant company. None of these relationships had approached the intensity of what I had shared with Philip. But I had come to recognize that intensity wasn't necessarily a marker of health or sustainability. What I sought now was something steadier, more balanced, a relationship where both people could grow without diminishing each other. I remember thinking about a year and a half after everything happened that I no longer wished Philip and Fiona had never gotten together, I admitted to Theo. Because if they hadn't, I might still be in that unbalanced relationship. Slowly, losing myself without even realizing it. Theo's expression was thoughtful. That's a profound shift. From seeing their betrayal as the worst thing that happened to you, to recognizing it as a painful but necessary catalyst for growth. It didn't make what they did right, I clarified. The deception, the lies. Nothing excuses that. but I could finally see that the end of that relationship had freed me to become someone stronger, someone truer to myself. I moved to the window, gazing out at the city lights twinkling against the night sky. By the time I finished the design program and started my own small firm, I realized I had built something that was truly mine, not an accessory to someone else's success, but my own achievement. And that felt more fulfilling than anything I had experienced in my relationship with Philip. Theo came to stand beside me, his arm slipping around my waist. And that's when we met. I leaned into him, smiling at the memory. That's when we met. And everything changed again. But this time, in all the right ways. 3 years after leaving New York, I found myself in a place I never expected, content with my solitude. My design firm, though small, had begun to attract attention for what clients called my intuitive spaces, environments that seemed to anticipate their emotional needs as well as their practical ones. I had a circle of friends who knew nothing of my past betrayal, who had never met Philip or Fiona, who knew me only as Emily Lancaster, the focused designer with the quiet laugh and occasional flashes of dry humor. My apartment had evolved from the sparse, temporary-feeling studio to a one-bedroom in a historic building with high ceilings and abundant natural light. I had furnished it thoughtfully, each piece chosen not for status, but for meaning or function. It was, in every sense, a home. My home, created on my terms. I had dated occasionally during those years, brief connections that never quite deepened into anything serious. I wasn't consciously avoiding commitment. Rather, I had developed a clarity about what I wanted and was unwilling to settle for less. If that meant being alone for a while longer, I had made peace with that possibility. The pivotal moment, what I later recognized as my true awakening, came on an ordinary Tuesday evening. I had received an email from an old acquaintance from New York, someone who had been peripheral to my social circle with Philip. The message was brief, a casual mention that she would be in Seattle for a conference and wondered if I might be free for coffee. Almost as an afterthought, she added, "Saw Philip and Fiona at a hospital fundraiser last month. They seemed tense. Rumor has it all is not well in paradise." I sat staring at those words, waiting for the familiar twist of emotion, vindication, perhaps, or at least a grim satisfaction that their betrayal hadn't led to lasting happiness. But the feeling never came. Instead, I realized with a start that I felt nothing at all about their marriage. No curiosity, no resentment, not even indifference. Their lives had simply ceased to be relevant to mine. I closed the email without responding and walked to the large windows of my apartment, watching the Seattle skyline as twilight deepened into evening. The realization settled over me like a gentle wave. I was free. Not just physically removed from their orbit, but emotionally untethered from their story. Whatever happened between Philip and Fiona, whether they remained together or drifted apart, succeeded or failed, had no bearing on my life or happiness. The revelation was so simple yet so profound that I laughed out loud, the sound echoing in my empty apartment. That night, I wrote in my journal for the first time in months, trying to capture the sense of lightness I felt. Today I realized I'm truly over them, I wrote. Not because I've forgotten, but because I've grown beyond the need for their story to have any particular ending. My happiness is no longer connected to their unhappiness, my success no longer measured against their failure. I am, at last, the author of my own story. Now, years later in the quiet of our hotel room after the eventful gala, I found myself sharing these pivotal moments with Theo as we processed the unexpected encounters of the evening. The memory of that journal entry remained a touchstone, marking the moment I had truly begun to heal. "That journal entry," Theo said as we shared a late-night cup of tea. "That's what you showed me on our third date." I smiled, remembering his surprised expression when I had shared that vulnerable piece of myself. "I wanted you to understand where I was coming from," that I wasn't carrying unresolved baggage from my past. "It was the moment I knew you were different," he admitted. "Most people I'd dated were still fighting old battles, still trying to prove something to ex-partners, who weren't even in their lives anymore. But you had this clarity about you, this sense of having fully processed your past." My firm's first major client came as a surprise, the very design school where I had rebuilt my life. The dean had approached me after a small gallery showing of student and alumni work, where I had displayed conceptual drawings for healing spaces in urban environments. "Your perspective is unique, Emily," she had said, her usual brusqueness softened by genuine interest. "We're renovating the East Wing next summer. Would you consider submitting a proposal?" Standing in her office the following week, I had felt a flutter of anxiety. This was the woman who had once given me an ultimatum about my academic performance, who had witnessed my lowest point. Now she was offering me a professional opportunity that could establish my nascent firm's reputation. "Know what you're thinking," she said, noting my hesitation. "You're worried I'm offering this because I feel sorry for you, or because I'm playing favorites with a former student." I nodded, unable to deny the concern. "I don't do pity projects, Lancaster," she said firmly. "I'm approaching you because your work shows exactly the sensitivity and innovation this space needs. But if you're not ready for a project of this scale, say so now, and we'll both move on without hard feelings." Her directness, so familiar from my student days, steadied me. "I'm ready," I said with more confidence than I felt. "And I'd be honored to submit a proposal." That project became my proving ground, the first step in establishing Lancaster Design as a firm capable of handling significant commissions. I assembled a small team, worked endless hours, and poured everything I had learned, both professionally and personally, into creating a space that would inspire creativity while offering comfort. When the renovation was unveiled 6 months later, the response exceeded my expectations. The East Wing, once a sterile collection of classrooms and offices, had been transformed into a dynamic environment that facilitated both collaborative work and individual reflection. Students gravitated to the space, faculty remarked on the improved energy, and before the paint was fully dry, I had received inquiries from 2 other educational institutions interested in similar transformations. That first success gave me the confidence to expand, I told Theo as we prepared for bed in our hotel room. The events of the gala had left us both too wired for immediate sleep, and talking through my journey seemed to help process the unexpected collision of past and present. It wasn't just about proving myself professionally. It was about trusting my own vision, my own instincts. Theo nodded, understanding in his eyes. That's often the hardest part of recovery from betrayal, learning to trust yourself again. Exactly, I agreed, settling against the hotel pillows. After being so wrong about Philip and Fiona, I questioned my judgment about everything. That project helped me reclaim my confidence. With each subsequent commission, my firm grew in both size and reputation. I hired 2 junior designers, then an assistant, then a project manager. We moved from my tiny home office to a small studio space in an artist's collective, then to a proper office in a converted warehouse with exposed brick walls and abundant natural light. The work itself evolved as well. While I had initially focused on residential and small commercial spaces, I began to attract clients seeking more complex environments, a wellness center for cancer patients, a community space for at-risk youth, corporate environments designed to reduce stress and enhance collaboration. Throughout this professional expansion, I continued my personal growth as well. The therapy sessions with Dr. Lambert became less frequent, but remained a valuable space for reflection. I maintained my hiking habit, finding solace and clarity in the magnificent landscapes surrounding Seattle. I cultivated friendships that were reciprocal rather than dependent, connections based on mutual respect rather than need. Dating, however, remained a challenge. I approached it cautiously, wary of repeating old patterns. I had a definite type. Before Philip, I explained to Theo, I was drawn to charismatic, ambitious men who seemed to have everything figured out. After him, I became more discerning. I wanted substance over charm, integrity over ambition. Hence your initial skepticism when I asked you to dinner, Theo said with a smile. I laughed softly, remembering my hesitation. You tick too many boxes: successful, articulate, attractive. Based on past experience, I should have run in the opposite direction. What changed your mind? He asked, though he knew the story well. You listened, I said simply. Not just to my words, but to the meaning behind them, and you shared yourself authentically, without the carefully curated persona most people present on early dates. Our early relationship had developed gradually, each of us bringing a thoughtfulness to the connection that reflected our respective journeys. Theo had his own history, a marriage that had ended when his ex-wife decided she wanted a different life than the one they had built together. Though the circumstances differed from my experience with Philip, the core lesson was similar. Love alone wasn't enough without shared values and mutual respect. I remember being nervous about introducing you to my friends, I admitted, thinking back to that period of tentative hope. They had seen me rebuild myself after Philip, and they were protective, especially Marcus. Marcus had been my first real friend in Seattle, a fellow design student who had appointed himself my unofficial guardian. When I finally introduced him to Theo 6 months into our relationship, his scrutiny had been almost comical in its intensity. I thought he might pull me aside and threaten bodily harm if I hurt you, Theo recalled with a chuckle. He practically did, I confirmed. He cornered you at the bar while I was in the restroom. I came back to find him giving you the third degree about your intentions. He asked if I understood what you had been through, and if I was prepared to be patient with your trust issues, Theo said. I respected him for it, actually. It showed how much he cared about you. Marcus's protective instinct had been well-founded. The Emily he had met in design school had been fragile, her confidence shattered by betrayal. He had witnessed my gradual rebuilding, had been there for the tearful nights and moments of doubt. His concern about Theo had come from genuine care. What convinced him you were different from Philip? I asked, curious about Theo's perspective on that early meeting. Theo considered the question. I think it was when he asked why I was interested in you, and I talked about your design philosophy before mentioning anything about your appearance or status. He seemed surprised by that. I nodded, understanding. Philip had always emphasized how I would fit into his world, how I would look on his arm at events, how my family background would integrate with his social circle. He talked about me as an accessory to his life rather than a person in my own right. Whereas I was captivated by your mind, Theo said, his eyes warm in the soft hotel lighting. Your creativity, your insight, your quiet strength. Everything else was bonus. The contrast between the two men couldn't have been more stark. Philip had wanted me to complement his life. Theo wanted to build a life with me as an equal partner. Philip had seen my success as secondary to his own. Theo celebrated my achievements as enthusiastically as his own victories. Even the way they handled conflict differed fundamentally. Philip had avoided difficult conversations, preferring to maintain a pleasant facade while resentment simmered beneath. Theo addressed issues directly but compassionately, believing that honest communication strengthened rather than threatened our connection. The turning point in our relationship, I said, thinking back, was that weekend in Vancouver, when we had our first real argument. Theo nodded, remembering. About my working through dinner 3 nights in a row while we were supposed to be on vacation. I was terrified to confront you about it, I admitted. With Philip, expressing disappointment or frustration always led to him withdrawing emotionally. I expected the same from you. Instead, I apologized and thanked you for telling me how my behavior was affecting you, Theo recalled. That's when I knew this was different, I said softly. Not perfect, but Healthy, real. The realization had been profound. That conflict, when approached with mutual respect and a genuine desire to understand rather than win, could actually strengthen a relationship rather than damage it. That honesty, even when uncomfortable, was safer than pretense. In the months that followed that Vancouver trip, our relationship had deepened. We had begun to discuss the future, tentatively at first, then with increasing confidence. When Theo proposed a year and a half after we began dating, it wasn't a dramatic production like Philip's carefully orchestrated moment. Instead, it happened on an ordinary Sunday morning as we shared coffee on his apartment balcony, the question emerging naturally from a conversation about our shared vision for the years ahead. "I knew I wanted to marry you the moment you said you needed to think about it," Theo said now, reaching for my hand. "Most people would have felt pressured to give an immediate yes, but you took the time to be certain. I loved that integrity. Had needed 3 days to consider his proposal. Not because I doubted my love for him, but because I wanted to be sure I was choosing marriage for the right reasons this time. Not for status or security or to fulfill social expectations, but because I genuinely wanted to build a life with this particular person. When I said yes," I reminded him, "I told you I was choosing you, not just the idea of marriage or the role of wife." "And I told you the same," he replied, "that I was choosing Emily Lancaster, exactly as she was, not some idealized version I had constructed in my mind. That distinction had made all the difference. With Philip, I had often felt the need to edit myself, to suppress opinions that conflicted with his, to present a polished version of myself that would enhance his image. With Theo, I could be authentically myself, complex and imperfect, knowing that he valued the real woman rather than a curated facade. Our wedding had reflected that authenticity, intimate and meaningful rather than showy, each element chosen to celebrate our connection rather than impress guests. My dress had been elegant but simple, the flowers seasonal and locally grown, the music selected for personal significance rather than traditional expectation. Most importantly, I had walked into that commitment with open eyes and a whole heart, not seeking completion, but choosing partnership with a man who respected my independence even as he cherished our connection. "That day," Theo said softly, "when you walked toward me in that simple white dress, with that quiet smile that reaches your eyes, I remember thinking that all the chaos and pain of our pasts had led us precisely where we needed to be." I squeezed his hand, grateful beyond words for the journey that had brought us together. From the wreckage of what we thought we wanted, we found what we actually needed. It was a truth that extended beyond our relationship to encompass our entire lives. The detours and disappointments, the betrayals and losses, all had shaped us in ways that prepared us for a deeper, more authentic connection than either of us might have been capable of without those painful lessons. As we finally settled in, to sleep, the events of the gala fading into perspective, I found myself filled with an unexpected sense of peace. Seeing Philip and Fiona again had not reopened old wounds as I might once have feared. Instead, it had only confirmed how completely I had healed, how thoroughly I had moved beyond that chapter of my story. The life I had now, with Theo, with my thriving design firm, with friends who knew and valued the real me, was not a consolation, prize for what I had lost. It was the life I was meant to have all along. The Wellington Medical Foundation Charity Gala faded into the past as Theo and I returned to our normal lives in Seattle. The encounter with Philip and Fiona, while momentarily disruptive, ultimately reinforced how far I had come from the devastated woman who had fled New York a decade earlier. "Do you think the lawsuit will settle?" I asked Theo one evening about a month after the gala. We were sharing a quiet dinner on our deck overlooking Lake Washington, the sunset painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. "It already has," he replied, setting down his wine glass. "The hospital board voted to settle last week. They didn't want the details coming out in court. especially the evidence about how long they'd known about the problems with Philip's research. I nodded, digesting this information. And Philip? The settlement includes his stepping down as head of cardiology, Theo said carefully. There's also a review pending with the medical board about his license. I felt a complex mixture of emotions, satisfaction, that justice would be served for the patients who had suffered, but also a tinge of sadness for the brilliant career derailed by ethical compromises. Philip had always been gifted. His research truly could have helped people if it hadn't been rushed and falsified for the sake of his ambition. I wonder how Fiona is handling it, I mused. Theo gave me a curious look. You still care about her? Not in the way you mean, I clarified. But she tied her entire identity to being Dr. Montgomery's wife, to the status and connections it brought. Without that, she'll have to figure out who she really is, Theo finished for me. Exactly. And that's not an easy journey. I should know. The conversation shifted to other topics, an upcoming project for my firm, a case Theo was preparing, for trial, plans for the weekend. The normalcy felt precious. A life built on mutual support and genuine partnership rather than appearances or status. Over the next several months, my firm continued to expand, taking on larger and more complex projects. What had once been a one-woman operation now employed a team of 12. Designers, project managers, and support staff who shared my vision for creating spaces that nurtured both body and spirit. One particular project became a turning point. In my professional transformation, the redesign of a renowned rehabilitation center for trauma survivors. The director had sought me out specifically, having seen my work on the Wellington Pediatric Wing. Your designs don't just look good, she had said during our initial meeting. They actually help people heal. That's what we need here, not just aesthetics, but a space that supports emotional recovery. The challenge was immense. Creating an environment that would feel safe and nurturing for people whose sense of safety had been violently disrupted. I spent weeks researching trauma-informed design, consulting with therapists, and most importantly, listening to the survivors themselves about what they needed from their physical space. This is the most important work I've ever done, I told Theo one night as I pored over sketches and notes at our dining table. These people have been through unimaginable pain. If I can create a space that helps them feel even slightly safer, slightly more at peace, you will, he said with quiet confidence. You understand rebuilding after trauma in a way most designers can't. That's your unique gift. His words struck a chord. The painful experience that had once seemed like the worst thing that could happen to me had, over time, become a source of insight and empathy that informed my work in profound ways. I understood intuitively what it meant to feel unsafe in a space, to need environment as ally rather than just backdrop. When the rehabilitation center opened a year later, the response was overwhelming. Residents reported feeling more secure, staff noted improved therapeutic outcomes, and the design community took notice, with the project winning several prestigious awards for innovation in healing spaces. My personal transformation continued, alongside my professional evolution. The woman who had once defined herself in relation to others, Philip's fiancé, Fiona's best friend, had become someone with a clear sense of her own identity and purpose. Where I had once sought external validation, I now found satisfaction in meeting my own standards. Where I had once adapted myself to fit others' expectations, I now chose relationships that honored my authentic self. The change wasn't just in circumstances, but in perspective, a fundamental shift in how I understood my place in the world. Therapy continued to play a role in this development, though my sessions with Dr. Lambert had become quarterly check-ins rather than weekly necessities. During one such session, about 5 years after leaving New York, she asked a question that crystallized my transformation. "Emily," she said, leaning forward slightly, "if you could speak to your younger self, the woman who just discovered her fiancé's betrayal. What would you tell her? I considered the question carefully. I'd tell her that what feels like an ending is actually a beginning, that the life she's mourning wasn't the right one for her anyway, that she's stronger than she knows, and the person she'll become through this pain will be more authentic, more compassionate, and ultimately happier than she ever would have been if the betrayal hadn't happened. Dr. Lambert nodded, a rare smile crossing her usually reserved features. That's how I know our work here is nearly complete. You've reframed your trauma not as something that happened to you, but as part of the journey that shaped you. The insight stayed with me, reinforcing what I had gradually come to understand, that our hardest experiences, while never invited or deserved, can become catalysts for growth if we allow them to be. This philosophy influenced not just my personal outlook, but my professional approach as well. In my designs, I began to embrace the Japanese concept of kintsugi, the art of repairing broken pottery with gold, treating breakage and repair as part of an object's history rather than something to disguise. Space should acknowledge that life includes broken places, I explained in an interview for a design magazine. When we try to create environments that are too perfect, too flawless, we deny the reality of human experience. True comfort comes not from the illusion of perfection, but from spaces that honor our whole stories, including the fractures. The article caught Theo's attention, not for the design principles, but for what it revealed about my own healing. You've made peace with your broken places, he observed, setting down the magazine. Not just accepted them, but actually found value in them. I had good help, I acknowledged, thinking of Dr. Lambert, of my friends in Seattle, and most of all, of Theo himself, whose steady presence had created safe space for my continued growth. Our relationship, too, had transformed over time, deepening, from the initial attraction to a partnership that balanced independence with intimate connection. We had learned to navigate disagreements with respect, to support each other's ambitions without sacrificing our own, to create a shared life that enhanced rather than limited our individual journeys. When the invitation to the Wellington Medical Foundation Charity Gala had arrived, addressed to both of us, my initial reaction had been hesitation. The gala represented a world I had left behind, connections to a painful past I had worked hard to process. "We don't have to go," Theo had said, noticing my expression as I opened the embossed envelope. "You've already proven yourself by building this life. You have nothing to prove to Philip or Fiona or anyone from that time." His words had resonated, highlighting exactly how far I had come. 10 years earlier, I might have declined out of fear or attended out of a desire to prove something. Now, I could make the decision based solely on what felt right for me. "Actually," I had replied after consideration, "I think I want to go. Not to confront the past, but because I'm proud of the work I did on the pediatric wing. Those children deserve to be celebrated, regardless of my history with the hospital." Theo had studied my face, looking for any sign of lingering pain or unresolved feelings. Finding none, he had nodded. "Then we'll go. And if it becomes uncomfortable at any point, we leave. No explanations needed." That simple exchange illustrated the transformation in how I approached life's challenges. Where once I might have avoided potential discomfort or pushed through it at cost to my well-being, I now made choices from a place of self-knowledge and authentic desire rather than fear or obligation. The night of the gala, seeing Philip and Fiona confronting the past so directly, had been a final test of this transformation. And I had passed, not by being invulnerable to emotion, but by experiencing those feelings without being controlled by them. The morning after our return from New York, I had woken early and slipped out to the deck with a cup of coffee, watching the mist rise off the lake as the day began. Theo joined me, wordlessly handing me a warm croissant from our favorite bakery. "What are you thinking about?" he asked after we had sat in comfortable silence for several minutes. "About circles," I replied. How life has this way of bringing us back to places we thought we'd left behind, but with new perspective. He waited, giving me space to elaborate. 10 years ago, standing in Philip's office, seeing him with Fiona, I thought my life was over, I continued. I couldn't imagine ever feeling whole again. And now, he prompted gently. Now I can see that moment as the beginning, not the end. If they hadn't betrayed me, I might never have found my way to Seattle, to my true creative voice, to you. I turned to face him fully. I wouldn't wish that pain on anyone, but I'm grateful for where it led me. Theo's eyes softened with understanding. That's the real transformation, isn't it? Not just building a new life, but finding meaning in the ruins of the old one. As I nodded, I realized that this was perhaps the most profound change of all, the ability to integrate every part of my story, even the painful chapters, into a narrative that made sense and held purpose, not because the betrayal itself had purpose, but because my response to it had revealed strengths and possibilities I might otherwise never have discovered. I think, I said slowly, watching the sun's light strengthen across the water. I'm finally ready to let go of the last of it, not just the pain or the anger, but the narrative itself. It's just something that happened once, not the defining moment of my life. Theo squeezed my hand. That's how you know you've truly healed, when the story loses its power. And in that quiet morning moment, with the future stretching bright before us, I knew he was right. The transformation was complete, not because I had forgotten or because I never felt echoes of the hurt, but because I had grown larger than the pain. I had become someone whose story encompassed that chapter without being limited by it. The broken places had been mended with gold, becoming not flaws to hide, but elements of beauty and strength in the woman I had become. 7 years after leaving New York, I stood in the gleaming lobby of the Vestal Center for Healing Arts, the largest and most ambitious project my firm had undertaken to date. What had once been an abandoned warehouse on Seattle's waterfront had been transformed into a holistic wellness center that combined medical care, mental health services, and complementary therapies under one roof. It's even more beautiful than the renderings, Dr. Ava Bennett, the center's founder and medical director, said as she surveyed the soaring central atrium. Natural light poured through strategically placed skylights, illuminating the living wall of plants that climbed 3 stories along the main staircase. The sound of a gentle water feature provided acoustic privacy while contributing to the sense of calm that permeated the space. The true test will be how it functions, I replied, watching as staff oriented themselves to their new environment during the pre-opening tour. A healing space needs to work on multiple levels: practical, emotional, sensory. Dr. Bennett nodded thoughtfully. You've thought of details I never would have considered. The texture of the handrails, the acoustic properties of each therapy room, even the subtle color shifts between different treatment areas. Those details matter, I explained. Our bodies and minds respond to environmental cues we barely consciously register. When those elements are thoughtfully aligned, the space itself becomes a healing tool. As we continued the tour, I felt a profound sense of accomplishment, unlike anything I had experienced before. This wasn't just a beautiful design. It was a culmination of everything I had learned, both professionally and personally, about what humans need to feel safe, supported, and empowered in their healing journeys. The project had required every skill in my repertoire: technical knowledge of healthcare requirements, understanding of human psychology, aesthetic sensitivity, and the ability to collaborate with a diverse team of medical professionals, architects, and specialized consultants. More importantly, it had drawn on my own experience of rebuilding after trauma, of creating an environment that could support transformation. When the Vestal Center opened the following month, it received national attention for its innovative approach to integrated care. Features in design magazines highlighted the thoughtful integration of beauty and function, while medical journals noted the improved patient outcomes and staff satisfaction compared to traditional healthcare settings. Lancaster Design is redefining what healthcare environments can be, wrote one prominent critic. Emily Lancaster's work transcends typical wellness aesthetics to create spaces that truly support the healing process on multiple levels. Her designs don't just look good, they actively participate in the therapeutic journey. The success of the Vestal Center led to similar commissions across the country: rehabilitation centers, mental health facilities, pediatric clinics, each one allowing me to refine my approach and expand my vision. Lancaster Design grew from a local Seattle firm to a nationally recognized name in healing environments. With this professional success came a deepening confidence in my own voice and vision. The woman who had once deferred to others' judgments, particularly Philip's and Fiona's, now spoke with quiet authority born of experience and proven results. I no longer needed external validation to trust my instincts or value my contributions. "You've found your sweet spot," Theo observed one evening as we celebrated the firm's expansion to a second office in San Francisco. "You're working at the intersection of your talent and your purpose." His insight resonated deeply. What had begun as a career had evolved into a calling, creating spaces that helped others heal, grow, and transform. The pain of my past had become a resource rather than a burden, informing my work with an empathy and insight that technical training alone could never provide. This sense of purpose extended beyond my professional life into my personal relationships as well. Where I had once sought validation through others' approval, I now approached connections from a place of genuine curiosity and open-hearted presence. The need to please, to perform, to be seen as perfect had fallen away, replaced by an authenticity that attracted like-minded individuals who valued substance over appearance. My friendship circle, once dominated by Fiona and our shared social set in New York, had evolved into a diverse community of creative, thoughtful people who enriched my life in different ways. Some were fellow designers who challenged my thinking and inspired new approaches. Others came from entirely different fields: a marine biologist whose perspective on natural systems influenced my design philosophy, a retired judge whose stories about justice and human nature deepened my understanding of ethical complexity, a pediatric nurse whose frontline experiences informed my healthcare designs. These relationships were built on mutual respect rather than dependency or performance, each person bringing their whole, imperfect self to the connection. The contrast with my friendship with Fiona couldn't have been more stark, where that relationship had ultimately revealed itself as competitive and conditional. These newer bonds were characterized by genuine support and celebration of each other's successes. Even my relationship with my mother had transformed. Once strained by her concerns about my settling for a design career instead of the more prestigious path she had envisioned, we had gradually found new understanding. My success on my own terms had finally convinced her that I had chosen correctly, and more importantly, our conversations had evolved from her directing to truly listening. "I was wrong," she had admitted during a visit after the Vestal Center opening. "I wanted security for you, but I defined it too narrowly. You've built something meaningful, Emily, something entirely your own." Coming from my traditionally minded mother, this acknowledgement represented a significant shift, not just in how she saw me, but in how she understood success itself. Of all the relationships in my life, however, none reflected my transformation more clearly than my marriage to Theo. Unlike my engagement to Philip, which had been characterized by my adaptation to his needs and priorities, my partnership with Theo was founded on mutual growth and genuine equality. We had built a life that honored both our individual passions and our shared values, a home that reflected both our sensibilities, traditions that held meaning for us both, a balance of independence and intimacy that allowed each of us to thrive while growing together. "I was thinking about what makes us work," I said to Theo one evening as we walked along the lakeshore near our home. It was our anniversary, 7 years since our wedding in the sculpture garden, and the milestone had prompted reflection. "What's your conclusion?" he asked, his hand warm around mine despite the autumn chill. "We want each other's success as much as our own," I replied after a moment's thought. "Not just professionally, but personally. Your growth, your happiness, your fulfillment matters to me as much as mine does. And I know you feel the same." He nodded thoughtfully. "That's a good way to put it. I think the other key is that we don't expect each other to be static. We give each other room to evolve, to change, to become more fully ourselves over time." His insight struck me as profoundly true. Unlike with Philip, who had seemed to want me to remain in a particular role that complemented his life, Theo genuinely celebrated my continued evolution. He wasn't threatened by my success or by the ways I had changed during our years together. He was interested, supportive, curious about who I was becoming. This freedom to grow without fear of outgrowing the relationship had allowed me to achieve a level of self-actualization I had never imagined possible in my previous life. I had become not just successful but whole, integrated in a way that aligned my work, my relationships, and my inner values into a coherent, authentic life. The achievement of this kind of wholeness represented a mastery not just of my craft, but of myself. The ability to live from my center rather than in reaction to external expectations or past wounds. It didn't mean perfect happiness or the absence of challenges, but rather a groundedness that allowed me to navigate life's inevitable difficulties without losing my core stability. When the invitation to the Wellington Medical Foundation charity gala arrived, I had viewed it not as a threat to this hard-won peace, but simply as a choice to be made based on my current priorities and desires. The woman who had fled New York in heartbroken devastation could never have imagined returning a decade later with such equanimity, such comfortable ownership of her narrative. Attending the gala, seeing Philip and Fiona again, witnessing their discomfort at Theo's connection to the malpractice lawsuit, had provided a kind of symmetry to my journey. I had come full circle, returning to the scene of my greatest pain with my greatest triumph. Not just professional success or a happy marriage, but the woman I had become through the process of rebuilding. "You know what struck me most about seeing them again?" I said to Theo as we neared the end of our anniversary walk. The lights of our home visible through the trees ahead. "What's that?" he asked. "How ordinary they seemed," I replied. "Not villains or monsters, just flawed people who made selfish choices. There was a time when they loomed so large in my mind, when their betrayal defined everything about my life. Now they're just people I used to know." Theo smiled, understanding the significance of this perspective. "That's the final victory, isn't it? When they lose their power not because you've defeated them, but because you've outgrown the story entirely." Looking toward our home, the life we had built together based on mutual respect and genuine love, I knew he was right. My achievement of mastery wasn't measured by comparing my life to Philip and Fiona's, or by proving something to those who had hurt me in the past. It was evident in the person I had become, in the contributions I was making through my work, and in my capacity for authentic connection with those who truly saw and valued me. The wounded young woman who had left New York believing her life was over had transformed into someone stronger, wiser, and more genuinely herself than she ever could have been had the betrayal not occurred. The painful breaking had ultimately created space for a more complete becoming, a life built not on others' expectations or social formulas for success, but on my own deepest values and authentic gifts. As Theo and I reached our front door, warmth and light spilling onto the path from within, I felt a profound gratitude for the journey, not despite its painful chapters, but including them. For in the end, it wasn't the absence of hardship, but its integration into a larger, more meaningful narrative that constituted true mastery of one's life. The morning after the Wellington Medical Foundation charity gala, headlines appeared in the medical news outlets. Top cardiologist steps down amid malpractice settlement. Though Philip wasn't mentioned by name in the initial reports, industry insiders would immediately know who was involved. Theo showed me the article over breakfast in our hotel room before our flight back to Seattle. "It's official," he said quietly. The hospital released a statement late last night. I scanned the carefully worded press release, noting how it emphasized the institution's commitment to patient safety while minimizing the specific violations. "They're protecting themselves," I observed. "As expected," Theo agreed. "But the medical board investigation will be more thorough. This isn't over for Philip." As we prepared to check out, my phone chimed with an incoming text. I glanced at the screen and froze, surprised by the name that appeared there. "It's from Fiona," I said, showing Theo the notification. He raised his eyebrows. "Are you going to read it?" I hesitated only briefly before opening the message. "Can we meet before you leave town? Just 30 minutes. The cafe in your hotel lobby. Important." "What do you think?" I asked Theo, showing him the text. He studied it thoughtfully. "That's your call entirely. Do you want to see her again?" I considered the question, searching my feelings. There was no anxiety, no dread, just mild curiosity. "I think I do," I said finally. "There's something unfinished between us. Not in a way that troubles me, but I'd like to hear what she has to say." Theo nodded. "I'll finish packing while you meet her. Take all the time you need." 20 minutes later, I spotted Fiona at a corner table in the hotel cafe. Gone was the polished, confident woman from the gala. This morning she looked tired, her makeup minimal, her posture less certain. When she saw me approach, she straightened, attempting a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Thank you for coming," she said as I sat down across from her. "I wasn't sure you would." "I wasn't either," I admitted. "But here I am." "I owe you an apology," Fiona said, her hands wrapped tightly around her coffee cup. "A real one, not the half-hearted version I've told myself was sufficient all these years." I waited, giving her space to continue. "What Philip and I did to you was unforgivable," she continued, her voice steady despite the emotion in her eyes. "We betrayed your trust in the worst way possible. And then we tried to rewrite the story to make ourselves the heroes instead of the villains." "Why now?" I asked quietly. "It's been 10 years. She looked down at her hands. "Seeing you last night. How you've built this amazing life. How genuinely happy you seem. It forced me to face the truth I've been avoiding. We didn't do you a favor by betraying you. We didn't set you free. We were selfish and cruel, and you succeeded despite us, not because of us." The honesty in her words surprised me. This wasn't the defensive Fiona I had encountered at the gala. "And Philip's career," I began carefully, "is imploding," she finished. "The research that made his name, that I helped promote and protect, it was flawed from the beginning. People were hurt, and now it's all falling apart." "I'm sorry," I said, and meant it. Not for Philip's professional consequences, which were deserved, but for the personal toll I could see it taking on her. "Don't be," she replied with sudden fierceness. "This reckoning has been coming for years. The lawsuit just accelerated it." She paused, then added softly, "Your husband is good at his job." "Yes," I agreed. "He is." Silence fell between us, not uncomfortable but weighted with shared history. "Are you happy, Fiona?" I asked finally, the question emerging from genuine curiosity rather than malice. Her eyes met mine, startled by the directness of the question. For a moment I thought she might offer her usual polished deflection. Instead, she sighed deeply. "No," she said simply. "I haven't been for a long time." Ladies, if you're watching this and something in my story resonates with you, I want to speak directly to your heart for a moment. When someone betrays you, whether it's a partner, a friend, or family member, it can feel like they've taken everything from you. your trust, your confidence, your sense of self. I know that darkness intimately. But here's what I learned through my journey, and what I hope you'll take away from this story. They can never take your power unless you give it to them. Your worth isn't determined by someone else's ability to recognize it. Your future isn't limited by someone else's betrayal. Your identity isn't defined by being someone's victim. The path forward isn't about revenge or proving your value to those who failed to see it. It's about reclaiming your narrative, rebuilding, on your own terms, and redirecting your energy toward creating rather than reacting. This isn't easy work. There will be days when grief overwhelms you, when doubt creeps back in, when the unfairness of it all seems too much to bear. Feel those feelings, honor them, but don't let them become your permanent address. The greatest triumph isn't showing your betrayer what they lost, though I won't deny that can be satisfying. The true victory is reaching a place where their opinion no longer matters to your sense of self-worth. I rebuilt my life not to prove something to Philip and Fiona, but to discover who I could become without the constraints of that relationship. The woman I found was stronger, more authentic, and far more capable than the one who had defined herself as someone's fiancé or best friend. You have that same strength within you. The same capacity for resilience. The same potential for a life more authentic and fulfilling than the one you're mourning. Trust yourself again. Forgive yourself for not seeing the signs. Allow yourself to grow from this experience rather than being diminished by it. And know that the darkest chapter of your story can become the foundation for its most triumphant turn. Your happiest days aren't behind you. They're ahead, waiting to be written by the woman you're becoming through this fire. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.